Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here and very happy to talk a little bit about user experience. But first things first, like Sarah said, I'm from a company called UX&I. We're based in Munich, in Düsseldorf, and in Berlin, and we do UX work, design consultancy, stuff like that. But I don't want to bother you with a long advertisement section, so let's cut straight to the point. I want to talk about the impact of user experience when you build digital products. And UX is probably one of the buzzwords at the moment. Everybody's talking about UX. Everybody says, do you have good UX? And we need that UX thing, and we need people who can do this, and it's crazy out there, and everybody is trying to get a grasp of what that exactly is, that strange UX thing, and how you can make it happen. And that's what I want to talk about today, and I also want to talk about what business impact it has, because oftentimes it's said that yeah, it's nice if the user is happy, but what we actually care about is cold hard cash, and we want to sell our products, and we want, I don't know, we want to increase revenues and stuff like that, and all this UX thing is very soft, and it's not that easily to grasp how it can have an impact on the business side of things. So that's also something I want to talk about today. And last but not least, I will give you some hints and give you a little insight on at least 3 methodologies that are rather easy to implement and can have a big impact on your product development process. But first things first, the introduction. So what is it actually that we're talking about? And like I said, there's a big hype at the moment, and you can get the impression that all this UX and usability thing is like a new kid on the block. It's something that just popped up a couple of years ago, and it's really the hot thing, and Apple and everybody else is doing it, and so you should probably do it yourself, and it's really the hype, and it'll probably be forgotten in a couple of years until there will be something else that we all follow. But actually, UX and usability have been around for some time. If you look at the first GUI, which was invented which the guys at Xerox PARC came up with in '73. If you're not familiar with the Xerox PARC story, I can only emphasize, read it, it's amazing. It's crazy how much of what we're working with and talking about right now comes from this little incubating hive in the '70s. And 10 years after that, the first people in the field of science, psychologists mainly, started to realize, okay, something is a little bit strange when people interact with computers, and it's probably a little bit complicated, and we have to create a new field to look at these complications and to look at how humans interact with interfaces and computers. And so human-computer interaction as a scientific field was founded in '83. Then the story goes on, Windows 95 in '95. Shortly before that, a Danish guy, Jacob Nielsen, coins the term usability for digital products and writes the first big book on it. It's the famous river book, where it basically says it's a river you have to cross, and it's called Usability Engineering. That was really a big milestone. Then in 2007, we have the mobile revolution. It's crazy if you think about it, that's 12 years ago, when iOS 1 came out. 5 years before that, the term user experience gained really momentum. It was coined by an American guy called Jesse James Garrett, and he wrote a very important book on it called The Elements of User Experience. It's still highly recommended, and it's very readable, and he's a cool guy. You can follow him on Twitter, and he tweets funny stuff. And right now, I would say the 2 biggest trends regarding interfaces, although there's a lot of other stuff, but ubiquitous computing, so the fact that computers are slowly becoming more and more invisible, and interfaces becoming slowly less and less visible, but more omnipresent in all of our lives, is one of the big technological trends. And at the same time, you had a book like Lean UX by Josh Seiden and Jeff Gotthelf, where they talk in length about how you can integrate UX into an agile development world, and in a world that tries to be very lean and very fast. Because in the old days, UX and usability engineering was oftentimes associated with rather long design processes that then lead to a product. But we don't want that anymore, we want to gain speed. But before we gain speed and momentum, I would like to take a step back and look at what usability actually is. Because in my experience, that oftentimes is a little bit of a misunderstanding or fuzziness around terminology. And it's important to clarify terminology, and because I'm German, I go to DIN ISO norms for that. And luckily, there's a DIN ISO norm for usability as well, the 9241. And it's a really thick book, and it has, I don't know, over 500 pages and costs 300 euros. And but there's some very handy definitions in there. One is that usability defines the extent to which a product, system, or service can be used by specific users to achieve specific goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specific context of use. So what it basically says is it specifies 3 elements of usability. It says you need to know your context, you need to know your user, and you need to know the user's goals. And all of these 3 things are specific. So you can't generalize and say, yeah, probably some people are going to use it like this, we're not sure. You have to really be specific, and you have to observe to understand who are these people and what are they trying to achieve. And then you have 3 criteria for successful usability. Effectiveness, I want to reach my goal efficiency, and satisfaction. And satisfaction is then described a little bit more in the norm, and it basically says free from harm. So it's not exactly about a pleasant experience. It more or less says, okay, if you survived it and reached your goal, it's okay, it's usable. And that's basically what usability is. The German word is Gebrauchstauglichkeit. Something is suitable for using it. That's very much a tool kind way of thinking. And if you think about where the first computers emerged, that was mainly work context. So that's where this whole field comes from. It was from people who had to use computers to reach their goals while they were working. And an important thing is that UX is something else than usability. It's something more, it's something different, it's something else. And one way to describe it is, and that was one of the earliest models, is that usability looks at more stuff. So this is why this dome is a little bit wider, but it also looks not only on the interaction itself, the moment where it's happening, where you're doing something with the interface, with the software, but it's also taking in account the before and the after, your expectations, but also how you, for example, tell a friend about the experience you just had with your software, and so on and so on. And one of the big ideas, this was driven by Don Norman. He was with Jobs, one of the Apple Force thinkers. And that's where this idea comes from, that the Apple packaging is so beautiful, because they said unboxing one of our products has to be part of this experience. We don't just want to be the use part of it, we want everything to be part of it. How you buy it, how you unbox it, how you tell your friends about it, and so on and so on. So it's much more, but then again, there's not only the time dimension, there's also dome. This is somehow larger, because there's more. And I think looking at this more is the much better definition. And this is a model that is was established by a German professor called Mark Hassenzahl. And here's this beautiful example of somebody making a phone call. And he says, we can look at a phone call and look at the what and the how of the phone call. And when we look at the what, we can talk about practices and activities, and we have, okay, somebody's calling, for example, their sister, and they have what he calls do goals. He wants to do something. I want to call my sister, so I pick up my phone. And then you have a how level of things, where you can look at what he calls motor goals. So you can look at operations, conditions, I have to tap something, I have to swipe somewhere, maybe there's a voice interface, but it's about motor stuff that's happening. It's about movement and voice and muscles doing muscle stuff. But he says, if you look at it like this, and this is the usability perspective, you can say, okay, the person could call his sister and it was, I don't know, efficient because he only had to press speed dial. When you look at just this, you have no understanding what this phone call or this activity means for the person doing it. It's totally opaque. You don't know anything about it. It's very alien. And he says to really create pleasant product experience, you need to understand what's happening behind and what the motives are behind all of this. And this is what he calls B goals, the why level of things. Why is somebody calling their sister? Is he missing a sister? Are they in an argument? Do they have to clarify something? Is it about business? Whatever. So what are the motives and the underlying needs that drive all these activities? And when you focus on these and put these into the center of what you're doing, then you can start thinking about user experiences, and then you can start designing these. And for this, Mark Hassenzahl and Sarah Diefenbach, another German professor, came up with a set of 8 basic human psychological needs that you can enhance with digital products. And these are based, you're probably all familiar with the Maslow thing, which is unfortunately one of his assistants made it a pyramid, and even he hated it during his time and said, oh, it's so stupid, it's not a pyramid, don't stop drawing the pyramid. But somehow we all have the pyramid at the back of our head, and the pyramid is very simplified, it isn't a pyramid. There's much more weird interaction between needs. This is based on a different needs model by an American guy called Sheldon, and he comes from the whole field of positive psychology. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And he defined 12, and Mark and Sarah took 8 of these and said, okay, these 8 have a relevancy when you're doing digital product things. And they're physicalness, so me and my body, my health, am I feeling healthy, all that stuff. They included this one relatively late, mainly because of these things, because of quantified self, fitness trackers, stuff like that, and suddenly we can enhance physicalness with digital products. Then it's autonomy, the feeling of being in control of my own actions. It's stimulation, which is stuff like I want to have adventures and I want to see new things, I want to be excited in my life. Meaning, which is stuff like spirituality, but also giving my life meaning through things that I do. Relatedness, which is feeling related to other people. Popularity, which is other people telling me I'm popular. If you think about Instagram and all this stuff, and oh, I get my likes, cool, people like me. Security, feeling safe in what you're doing. And competence, feeling your impact in the world. And I highlighted 3 of these because they are hugely important, and we're going to get back to these because they are drivers for really positive experiences. So that's, I think, a good way to look at it. And if you look at the relationship between user experience and usability, you can find out that if you look at it from a needs perspective, sometimes the two can even contradict themselves. This is a very nice project Mark Hassenzahl did while he was in Essen at the Folkwang University as a professor. And it's a key thingy for your, I don't know, Flur. And the idea is if I pick up the car key, the bike key falls down. And I have to get it up and hang it back there. So it's for people who intend to go by bike, but are a little bit lazy and sometimes grab for the car, and so it forces them from a usability perspective, it's a nightmare. It's absolutely not efficient that you, every time you pick up your car key, you have to take your bike key and put it back on the board again. But from a needs perspective, if I say, okay, I want to be healthier, actually I want to go by bike, but you know, this innere Schweinehund, you know it all, prevents me from doing it, then that's actually really smart. And it's a small little disruption, I think, that explains this dynamic nicely. So we have established that. User experience is about asking about the why, about motives, about big needs. Now we can look at why is this relevant anyway? What's the business impact of this? And I want to tackle this from 3 angles. The first one is, at one point in my life I realized that I have to, more or less in all presentations I do, include a Dilbert comic. That tells you something about my biography. And so here we have Dilbert, and he's saying, oh, we talked to a lot of people and we included all their feature suggestions in our product, and it turns out all of them were dumb and now our product is ruined. And then he says, yeah, probably we should have asked people outside of this building. So it's this whole idea that's also very heavily found in design thinking, where it says, get out of the fucking building. Go out there, go meet the people that you're creating products for. We all otherwise live on our own assumptions and just follow our own maybe false assumptions about the world. It's much better to go out, observe, collect data, and then work on a solution. And outside the building, not inside the building, because they're the idiots. No, they're probably not the idiots, but you get the idea. So there's, I think, 3 interesting points to look at this. The first one is project success, why you should care. And the following slides, please take these with the largest imaginable grain of salt. That's why I put this there. It's the Standish Chaos Report. It's actually okay-ish from a scientific perspective, but it's rather easy to punch holes in there. On the other hand, they're the only ones in the world right now doing something like this on a scale like this. The Standish group goes out into the world every, I think, 2 or 3 years, and they gather data about IT projects, a lot of IT projects. We're talking about tens of thousands. And then they try to identify what's the ratio of successful to non-successful projects and what are criteria for driving success in these projects. But the definition of success and how they do the regression with the criteria, it's, like I said, you can easily punch holes in it, so big grain of salt. But nevertheless, their definition is on time, in budget, with satisfactory results, but that's where it gets blurry. Sometimes they ask management if it was satisfactory, which is probably oftentimes in relation to in time and in budget, and it's a little bit icky. But 29% of the projects are considered, and this is 2017, so this is not like the 80s where we said, oh, software is so complicated, we're never going to get this done. This is now. 29% of the project successful, 52% challenged, and 19% outright failed. Failed means nothing ever saw the light of day. There was nothing ever going live or being deployed in a productive environment. They just failed miserably. Somebody pulled the plug at some point. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a project like this that's had this death march sort of feeling to it. It's not a nice experience. But you can learn a lot there. And it still happens, and it still happens a lot. By the way, 2 interesting side notes, I think. The first one is, okay, that's pretty much the larger and more complex projects grow, the more likely they are to fail, which tells you something about thinking in MVPs and reducing scope and starting with small steps and not just going, oh, we're going to conquer the world with this. And another, I think, very interesting thing when we think about another buzzword at the moment is that Agile approaches are more successful, but still have 52% challenged, so the same ratio as the other ones, and 9% failed. So they have more successful projects, but they still have a lot of projects in the challenged area. So agility is not the answer to everything, unfortunately. Actually, nothing is the answer to everything, but sorry to burst that bubble. Only 42, but that's a different talk. So, success factors. I just listed the ones who have more than 10% impact, in case any smart people are here, wow, that's not adding up. You have executive support, you have emotional maturity, which is a tough one actually, if you think about it, emotional maturity of everybody involved. And you have skill stuff with 10%, and then you have 2 that, in my opinion, are directly related to usability and user experience and knowing the people and the goals of the people you're building this for. The first one is user involvement, how actively you were able to involve your users in the overall goings of the project and your actual users, not some proxy salesperson who says, oh, I'm talking to these people regularly, I exactly know who they are and what they want, and optimizing scope. So cutting your project down to the scope that you really need, and especially the scope that your users really need. So that's 2 very handy angles that are directly related to user experience and user research that will give you a better chance that your projects are successful. And there's another big and important idea in all of this. It's this, I don't know who of you is familiar with this graph, it's the cost of change. It's how much it costs you to change something over the course of the project. Apparently, well, it costs you not much if you're still in the requirements phase regarding this module, feature, or whatever. And it costs you a lot to change it once it's in production. So it's better to get it right in the requirements and adjust it there than to adjust it when you have it live and in production. That's another important factor. Then we also have something else. I talked about Apple, and everybody's talking about Apple and how good they are at this, and they're good at some parts, they're not good at all parts, but we can learn a lot of things from them, and I think design and experience design is a differentiating factor for them, although some of the others are probably catching up. So user experience and a positive user experience can help you when you're trying to differentiate yourself from the market. And I'm going to show this with two models. The one, this is one of the weirdest, wackiest, hardest to understand ways to describe this model. These are the Kano Principles. I don't know who's familiar with Kano. Japanese product management forethinker from the whole Toyota people. Basically, what he says is that you have different kinds of quality in your product. You have stuff that he calls performance quality or performance needs. That's your higher, louder, faster, better things. Then you have basic needs. That's what's sometimes called hygiene factors. That's where people will only yell if it's not there. They will say, but why doesn't this have whatever, ABS? Every car has ABS. Why doesn't this have it? And then you have delighters. That's unexpected stuff. My favorite example is cameras in telephones. The older among you, like me, remember probably a time when not everybody had a telephone with them, or they would have needed a really long cable. And so we had mobile telephones, which was crazy. The first one were this size, and probably everybody who used it has now died of a tumor. And, oh, that was nasty. And then suddenly, sometimes during the, I don't know, late 90s probably, somebody invented the possibility to put a camera into a telephone. And it blew all of our minds. It was like, this is crazy. This can't be. I have a phone that I can take with me everywhere. That's crazy enough. And now I can take pictures with it. This is amazing. I have to have one of these things. This is really cool. And I would never have expected phones to be able to do something like this. So there we have a delighter, and we have what Kano calls attractive quality. That's where you can really surprise your customers. But over time, these delighters turn into performance needs, and they turn into what he calls performance quality. And suddenly it is about, okay, megapixels, and it is about, okay, I'm giving you these and these filters, and so on, until at some point, a camera and a phone is just a basic need. If you would go out today and buy a smartphone and you would realize that it doesn't have a camera, you would be shocked. You would go, what? They forgot the camera? That's crazy. Why did they do that? Why didn't they include a camera? Are they insane? So you have a dynamic there, and you have to take good care that you have stuff that's in the attractive quality quadrant and that you're able to outperform your competitors in the performance quadrant, and at the same time that you meet all the basic needs so that nobody goes crazy. A slightly different way to look at it that I like a lot is to take your do goals that you hopefully identified in research and cluster them according to two questions. The first question is, how important is this to you, dear user? Is it highly important, for example, for the job that you do? Or is it medium, or would you say, nah, it's actually not that important. It's cool to do it, but it's not that important to me. And then you ask the second question, how satisfied are you with the current solution? Highly satisfied, everything's fine, everything's cool, don't need to change anything? Or are you actually very dissatisfied and say, oh, this is actually really a problem for me? And again, you end up with quadrants, and satisfaction low, importance low, you can ignore this. Nobody needs it anyway. Satisfaction high, importance low, do it later. Deprioritize it. Do what the guys at Basecamp call underdo your competition. They have this, I don't know if any of you is familiar with Basecamp. It's a project management software done by two very cool American guys, Jason Friedman, and one is actually Danish, whatever. They have this credo, underdo your competition. They say, if our competitor has 10 features, we do 9, but we do each individual feature better than our competitor's version of this feature, which is actually pretty smart. They say, we're never going to win the feature list battle, but we're always going to have better quality in the features themselves. So probably it's good to ignore some stuff, especially if it's not important. And then you have the really interesting ones. You have areas where the importance is very high and the satisfaction is high. There you can think about performance. You can think about stuff like, can I make this faster? Can I make this more mobile? Can I make this more connected? Can I make this more convenient? Do I find angles to outperform my competition? And then you have the most important quadrant. You have importance high, so this is stuff that's really important to people, but it's not working at the moment. And that's where you can innovate, where you can say, okay, this is actually something that people really need, but nobody has seemed to find a solution up until now. And there, again, you have a nice opportunity to outperform your competition. So, last but not least, and this basically also drives the other two, is that at the end of the day, what we want to do when we try to build successful products is we want to create value for our customers. And this gets me to these two guys. They're Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, two American psychologists, and they came up with they're from the whole positive psychology field, and they came up with a concept they called intrinsic motivation, which is part of something bigger they call self-determination theory. And the idea is that we as human beings do some of the stuff we do because of extrinsic factors, because of somebody tells us something. They say, oh, I'm going to smack you if you don't do it, or I'm going to pay you big money if you do this. And we have external factors, the old thing with the carrot and the stick, and then people will start doing stuff. But they said that's not everything. There's also internal factors that drive us to do things, and it's observable in the world. People do stuff that you can't explain with carrots and sticks because there is no initial benefit for them, or there is no initial danger and there is nobody with a stick that's threatening them. And they tie these to the three basic psychological needs I highlighted earlier. Autonomy, the feeling that I'm in control of my own life, that I can steer the course of it. I put a bike there, but also a car. I think it's no coincidence that the automotive industry calls the feature autonomous driving instead of automatic driving. Because autonomy is at the core of the value proposition of cars. It's I can go wherever I want to go, whenever I want to go with my own car. So that's a big promise regarding autonomy. Then you have bonding, the feeling of I faked it, if you remember, it's actually called relatedness, but with them, that I feel connected to them, that I have experience with them together. The funny thing is that it doesn't have to be reciprocal. It's totally okay if you feel connected. The connection doesn't have to go both ways. And the same thing, funnily enough, applies with popularity. Because you don't have to like your Instagram followers. Actually, you just want them to follow you, if you're that kind of person. And last but not least, you have competence. The feeling that you have with what you do an actual impact in the world, that you can build stuff, that you can achieve mastery in a craft, that you can influence the world around you by being productive. And they say these three are basic human needs. That's something that's really hardwired into all of us. And you can observe it even in a very early infant stage, that humans have this drive to be autonomous. They go crazy if they're somehow restricted. They have a drive towards bonding, and they have a drive towards having an impact on the world. And thus, if you try angles in your product that satisfy these needs, you have built something very powerful. You have built something that supports basic psychological needs of humans and that will get them to intrinsically interact with your product out of their own will. And this is oftentimes, or you can nicely contrast this with this whole gamification debate. I don't know, who still remembers Foursquare? Show hands, please. That's not a lot of people, and they were really big. They were one of these startups, amazing ratings. Oh, Foursquare, have you heard of them? They were a map service that focused a lot on gamification. So you got achievements for everything. You went to a restaurant, you got an achievement. You went to a bar, you got an achievement. You went anywhere, you got achievements. People battled each other, and they created a game around this map and finding places experience. The problem was that all the motivation to use this application was extrinsically. It was by people getting virtual points in the game. And then they lost interest in the game, and thus they lost interest in the product, because there was no imminent other value than playing this game. And when you get bored of the game, you look for another game, but you don't look for another map service. And so build your products on needs that drive intrinsic motivation and not just extrinsic motivation, because it's much more sustainable that way. So, and a nice little way to find out if you have actual value. I like to play this game. In a lot of projects and workshops I do, it's called the bad cost matrix, and the idea is you ask your stakeholders 2 questions, or the people who came up with the idea. The first question is, how much is this going to cost the company to build? And the scale is very abstract. So this is not about pinpoint sums, it's really ballpark figures. Ice cream, holiday, monthly salary, car, house, depending on your life choices. These may vary, so at times I had a car more in the ice cream area actually. And then you ask, so you have your first base covered. How much will it cost the company to build this? And then you do the second question. How much would you bet of your own personal money that this idea, this feature, this business model or whatever has any actual value for people? And again, you have the same scale: ice cream, holiday, monthly salary, car, house. And interesting things happen, because you find out that people are willing to easily bet their company's money, because they're doing nothing else when they build it, on something where they would actually themselves say, yeah, I don't know, maybe a bike, I don't know, holiday probably, but actually I'm not that sure. And that's a good technique to drive further research, where you say, okay, people, look at this. We're building, and oftentimes it's not houses, it's whole small cities. We have the budget of a small city here, and we're actually, all of us wouldn't bet our car on the fact that this has any actual value for anybody. Maybe we should go out and do a little more research. Or if you're a little bit more sure, maybe you can do something like start with a prototype and test it out with actual people and see if it's working for you. So going out, doing user research is one thing. Doing prototypes is another thing. I want to give you 3 methodologies which can also help you in your day-to-day work when trying to integrate or to get more positive and good user experiences into your products. And the background for this is that I think that almost all IT and software projects are more or less shaped by these 3 forces. They're shaped by users, they're shaped by technology, and they're shaped by businesses. What usually happens is that they don't like each other, because these guys are the IT department and they're stupid and slow and make a lot of mistakes, and these guys are the guys from business who don't know about IT and are always trying to cramp in stuff and come up with imaginary deadlines. And then you have these strange people, users, and you have these UX guys running around because upper management said we need that now. The solution is actually pretty simple. Start tearing down these really stupid internal fights and start talking to each other and understand that, yes, you have different goals and different requirements. You have requirements from a technological perspective, you have business requirements, and you have user requirements. And sometimes these contradict each other, but when you talk to each other and try to understand the other's perspective, you will find middle ground and you will find stuff that benefits the user, that benefits the business, and that is technologically viable. So this is a process model that I and a colleague came up with as part of a bigger thing we call UX thinking, that we also teach classes on. And the big idea here is that you take product development stages, strategize, analyze, vision, ideate, and implement, and integrate these very strongly. So they don't become these individual steps one after each other, but they're very much integrated and they're informed. And the vision is a central part of it, because the vision helps us to make UX not just something that this one guy that was really hard to find and expensive that we hired now does, but that creating a good user experience is something for the whole team, for everybody involved. We have this idea in Agile development of collective code ownership that was established by guys like Kent Beck. And I think to really make UX work in products, we need collective UX ownership. Everybody on the team has to feel responsible for creating great experience, because every single team member plays a role in doing that. So I want to look at three methodologies. The first is personas. This is almost classical stuff right now, hated by a lot of people, at least I think wrongly applied oftentimes. Then we have product visions, and we have user story mapping. The first thing, personas. You probably have encountered them, you probably have been bothered by them, you probably have scratched your head when somebody sent you a PowerPoint with, here are our 17 personas, and we described them, and this is, I don't know, Klaus, and he's 23 to 28, and has 1.2 kids, and you're like, well, this is not a person, this is strange, this looks like marketing to me. Which is one of the rather strange applications at the moment. Personas were actually invented by this guy. This is one of the forethinkers of interaction design, Mr. Alan Cooper, who's a programmer, by the way. He's a developer. He wrote Visual Basic and other stuff. And he also wrote a book called About Face, where he said, personas provide us with a precise way of thinking and communicating about. So we have this kind of tool that we can use to better understand our users and think about them, but that we also can use to communicate with each other. Okay, who it is that we're talking about, or not who. How users behave, how they think, what they wish to accomplish, and why. What's missing? Anybody know what's missing? I already said it, I gave it away. No? Who? He's not talking about who these people are. And he said, actually, it doesn't matter that much. It doesn't matter that much how old they are, what gender they have, where they live, if they like dogs, what's their favorite soft drink, what car they drive, especially if it doesn't have anything to do with what they try to accomplish and why in the context of your product. It's much more interesting to look at their behavior and try to understand their needs, their goals, and so on and so on. And the first book he wrote about this, and it's still fun to read. It's basically a rant against all software developers in the world, written for managers. It's sometimes hard to read this nowadays because it's really polemical. It's called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, the inmates being the developers. And there he says, personas are a very powerful tool that help you focus your user, but that also help you to prioritize. Because he says you have one primary persona that you build your interface for. You have that one user or user group where you say, okay, these are the people with these kind of problems that wish to achieve these goals that we're building this thing for, and not the other 24,000 people or groups out there that marketing identified. So that's a very powerful thing. And what you can nicely do, I'm sorry that this is in German. By the way, I'll give you the slides afterwards so that you can read all of this up and train your German. What we oftentimes do in our project is that we keep our personas very slim. It's just a picture, it's a name, it's an age, it's maybe a very short biography. And then we have, oftentimes we have an entourage where we say, okay, there's other people involved here. It's not just a single person. No man is an island. And then we say, okay, which of the basic needs have any relevancy in the context of our product? So this, for example, is about an app for managing personal finances where we say, okay, we found out in research that autonomy is a very important factor. Competence is a factor because there's people out there who have fun managing their personal finances and having an overview, and then also security is very important when it comes to money and data about money, for example. So that's one thing. Use personas, but base them on research. They're basically a storytelling thing at the end of the day, and try to keep them tight and don't go crazy. The second one is product visions. Why are these helpful? So, when you think of, this is called League of Geeks, and I'm a role player. I used to be a role player. I don't have time for childish things like this now. And if you think of product development like a quest, and you and your party of adventurers are doing your quest thing, and you're walking around in the landscape trying to achieve a goal, and you're experiencing crazy things, and do you know the hippo? Den of the hippo? Anybody familiar with the hippo? Highest paid person's opinion? You're probably familiar with this. When you have a room, the highest paid person in the room says how it's done. And he doesn't care about data and research or anything. He says that's what you should avoid at all cost. And that's maybe another important thing. User experience and good usability are a lot about letting data drive your decisions and not letting opinion and assumption drive your decisions, but gathering data to better understand what's actually going on in the world. But to guide your way, you need a rough direction. You need what's sometimes in the Anglo-Saxon word called a North Star or a true north. You need something, you don't need to specify exactly where you want to go. That's V-Modell, old school, Wasserfall development. Well, we just need a Lasten- and Pflichtenheft and it will have 500 pages and we're sure that every bit of a developer will read it and nothing can go wrong. That's good if you if you care a lot about compliance. But if you want to build successful projects, you need a rough direction where you're going. You need a true north. You need a compass that tells you, okay, are we in the right direction? We tested it a little, probably not. We need to adjust it a little bit. So that's what visions are for. And they help empower teams to do their things autonomously. This is a very famous illustration by Henrik Knieberg from Spotify where he says, what you actually want is high alignment and high autonomy of your teams. Again, there's this strange autonomy thing. It somehow makes people do their stuff intrinsically. So if you have low autonomy and high alignment, you have this situation. It's the Dilbert boss. Dilbert's everywhere. We need to cross the river, and you do it like this. You build a bridge, and the manager tells everybody, okay, please do it like this, this, and this. Because I studied computer science as well, 35 years ago. And this leads us to the problem. A lot of the projects that we do are highly complex, and we have highly trained, very skilled people in our teams that solve these problems. And it's very good to trust them and to align with them. And the bottom right quadrant, we have what's also sometimes happening, especially if you don't have management attention, where everybody's doing anything and management is like, oh, there was this bridge thing and I hope well, whatever. What you actually want is the top right quadrant, where it says you have high alignment, everybody has a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve with your project, everybody has a clear vision and there's a shared understanding about this vision. And then you let the team figure it out themselves. You say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is the value we want to create for our customers. How you do it, you're the experts. You do your thing. And one way to create these visions that I really, really like is applying something that's one of the pillars of how Amazon works. It's called working backwards. And it's the idea that you narrate your projects from a point in time where they have already happened. And they usually do this by writing stuff like the press release before they even started working on something, or the FAQs. But there's also another approach which is much more user-centered, and that is writing a letter from the future, from a future user to the team that will start to work on it, that thanks the team for the great product. And really write a letter. So don't tweet, German Bahn, too late again, like we usually communicate with corporations nowadays, but a letter. So that's a high amount of effort. Who sits down these days and writes a letter to a company where they say, I really want to thank you? So you really have to think about how can we spark this amount of excitement in people with our product? And it really helps to create a shared vision among all the team members. And last but not least, the methodology that's also very, very cool and helps drive things from a user's perspective, and it connects very nicely with Agile methodologies. It's called user story mapping. And the idea is that this is very much a nutshell of user story mapping. I could talk about this for hours on end, Sarah knows. The gist is you have a flow of your user through your application, like a journey, for example, like one of these journey maps, you probably know them. And the flow is broken down in individual steps, and then you allocate user stories to each of these steps to find out, okay, what's actually happening there, how could we do this, what are alternatives, and you explore it with the whole team, and then you can also use it to prioritize it. And I really love this methodology, and it was created by this guy. He also wrote a very cool book on it called User Story Mapping, and it's not just about user story mapping, it's about building successful products in general. And the book is very nice, he's very humble, he's very cool. He talks about failure a lot and failing a lot in the book, which I think is very nice, and he lets a lot of room for applications of the methodology that diverge from his approach, where clients took it and tried out something else, and he said, hey, it's cool, you can do this. The important thing is that you do it with the whole team, and you see it as a building block for your own communication. And when I started working with this, and probably again because I'm German, my feeble over-engineering mind immediately identified a whole lot of contradictions. So I said, but it isn't always a sequence, actually. You need to fork it, because sometimes people do this and sometimes they do this. Or sometimes this comes before this. How do I do it then? Do I need more dimensions? And blah, 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 and so on and so on. And contradictions, I went crazy. Luckily enough, I had the honor of having my product owner training with Jeff Patton. And I had the chance to talk to him and address all these nitpicky things. And he said this, which was amazing. He just said, dude, it's a tool, chill. So this was probably the most American thing you can say to a German, saying, yeah, but the Spaltmaß is wrong, actually. He said, whatever, fuck it. Use it with your team. See it as a tool. If it helps you, use it. If it doesn't, don't use it. And so this is still my credo when it comes to a lot of stuff I do. Because at the end of the day, user story mapping, especially if you do it with a team, and especially if you put the stuff out there on a wall, if you have the facilities to do that, it helps you to drive shared understanding. There is this very nice comic by a guy whose name I forgot, who really illustrates all the cruelty in shared understanding, because these three guys or girls, they think, oh, we all agree, and I'm glad we all agree, because in their head they have shared understanding. Oh, we all know what we mean when we say X, Y, Z. We all know what the project is going to be like and what the product, what the features will be like and so on. But then when you get them in front of a chalkboard or in front of a wall or in front of something where they can paint these things, they will start to realize, when we put it out there, this is actually something different. We all have our own things in our head, and we have somehow have to align it, and that's what you do then, and then you can really say, I'm glad we all agree, and you don't just have the feeling, but you have the actual shared understanding, which helps tremendously with building good products. And that's where this talk ends. So if you want to learn more about UX thinking, go there. If you want to follow me or UX&I on Twitter, go there and there. And I just can say thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention.